Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Nicole Robinson. I am Fair Fight's Deputy Executive Director. Fair Fight Action is a nationally recognized leader in Georgia-based nonprofit that fights for free and fair elections. We fight against voter suppression, we expose anti-voter policies, we work to protect and expand voting rights, engage individual voters at the grassroots level, which I know many of you are, so thank you all so much for being a part of this fight with us. We support pro voter candidates and we convene civic organizations to ensure elections are free and fair because every vote and voice matters. And tonight, we're incredibly excited and grateful to have you here with us for Fair Fight Together. We recognize that many of us in this moment is fraught with tension and concern. We all have a lot of things that we are worried about, whether it's our own safety, whether it's our loved ones. And so we're really grateful for y'all to be here with us and just want everyone to know that Fair Fight Action and Fair Fight, we continue to be in this fight and we're unwavering in our mission. And this series is one of our efforts to bring our community together to support, educate, and motivate each other. And tonight's event is the fifth of a regular series where we will gather with our friends, supporters, activists, and advocates, all of who support in America by and for we the people. And so tonight's event will feature two incredible experts in the fight against media and media misinformation. um, Angelo Carusone, the president and CEO of Media Matters for America and Media Matters Action Network, and Esosa Osa, the founder and CEO of Onyx Impact. And so before we get started, we just have a couple of housekeeping pieces. So we welcome questions. We did receive a lot of questions ahead of this evening and tried to incorporate them into the discussion. So we'll try to get to everybody's questions, but I just want to forewarn folks, we might not be able to get to everything, but if you think of something else in the meantime, please add that to your chat and we'll try our best to get to it. Um, and I also want to make sure people know that we're recording this and we will be sharing clips and links to it as well. If you miss anything or want to share it with your friends or your networks, we would love that. And then also want to highlight for people that if you need closed captions, that should be available. If you have any issues with it, please add that into the chat. And so before we jump into it, I'm going to quickly introduce our guests. So we have Angelo Carusone with us, who has been president and CEO of Media Matter since December 2016. In November 2022, he was selected to chair the organization's board of directors. Founded in 2004, Media Matters is a nonprofit media watchdog and research organization, and Angelo is an expert on the information ecosystem and right-wing extremism. He's a go-to resource for journalists writing about misinformation and the underlying structures that fuel or enable it. And you can regularly find him on television sharing his insights and analysis. And we also are joined by Esosa Osa, who is the founder and CEO of Onyx Impact, an organization created to better understand and combat disinformation targeting Black communities and increase Black civic engagement. Esosa was previously the Deputy Executive Director of Fair Fight Action, where I had the privilege of working with her. And when she was with us, she led our organization's pro-democracy reform efforts with a focus on combating disinformation and supporting voting policy reform. And she also oversaw our organization's research, communications, political, and organizing teams. Sosa has a robust background working on the Hill and working on Georgia campaigns and other campaigns. She's a portfolio manager at BlackRock, just jack of all trades. And we're really grateful to have both Angelo and Esosa here with us to share their insights on a really important topic. And so I want to start us with kind of like, there's a reason we played that clip, and I think it's a really great illustration of a really big issue that we see in the media right now. So sorry, Angela, if you guys want to talk about like the background for that clip, what was missing, and kind of the context there.
Absolutely. Uh, it's not that clip doesn't inspire a lot of hope, right? And this was an episode of one of the m- uh, most viewed shows in the Black community online post um, the state of the union. And what you would never guess by watching that clip, that viral clip of of that show was Representative Al Green. I mean, that is a civil rights icon, right? He killed that interview, right? He 100% um, moved all the folks to his side on the importance of the staying engaged, civic involvement, the party, like all types of issues. But that was the clip that went viral. A completely and totally misleading um, um, understanding of what happened. And that is what is so incredibly important about today's really fractured, really misleading mis and disinformation ecosystem is uh, we have to understand how people are actually receiving their information, or we are going to be dumbfounded when it turns out that all types of mis and disinformation have gotten through, and folks aren't understanding fact or truth as such. Other than that, Nicole, I think everything is fine.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Angelo, kind of like what are your thoughts about that clip? Because I'll be honest, like I see Breakfast Club clips all the time, and what struck me about that is the clips I see are usually pretty short. They're pretty frustrating. I don't really walk away feeling good. I can think and be like something feels wrong about this, and maybe go search out the rest of the clip. But that's not something most people have time to do. So kind of like, what are your thoughts on things like that? The nature of people swiping quickly, people having shorter attention spans now, and how it impacts how people interpret and take in media and the impact of mis and disinformation.
So I think the way that when I see that clip, I think it is a really good example of a much larger challenge that we're confronting, and it feeds into some of the disorientation, some of the confusion, some of the hopelessness, and also it helps explain sort of the types of people that are in power right now. It's not just that they won power; it's that Trump, in particular, built and organized power on what used to be considered the fringes, and now a bunch of far right fever swamp creatures are now a center to our politics. They were brought into the fold. And it helps explain seemingly why he was consistently underestimated in some ways, especially by more conventional media, and why it was hard to calibrate just how powerful or potent his political influence was. And the so the put a fine point on it, the clip is an illustration of this larger trend, which is day to day. They get to take something, as Esosa noted, that was actually a really positive interaction. It was an example where some skepticism, which is what these discussions are about. That's an important place to have skepticism and then to have that skepticism overcome, right? So, the Breakfast Club hosts are explaining their frustration, and Congressman Al Green is validating it and then rounding it out with a whole bunch of larger context and information and persuading. And that part gets missed. And the reason it doesn't just get missed in that moment, it's that they take that one clip and how does that then turn into this larger false narrative or misinformation? And I just want to show one illustration because I think it really helps summarize and capture it. Because when I look at that clip, this is what I see. I see this. And what you have on the screen here is a picture of we did this analysis of the top 500 online shows. So these are podcasts in particular, or or the equivalent of a podcast. And we took out the ones that don't have anything to do with politics, or then they never touch on politics, which is about 180 or so. So then left about 300 and change, and then we coded them as right leaning, right, left leaning. Um, and what you get here is a visualization of all the shows that have more than 1 million subscribers, so followers. And I'll explain why we made the cutoff at 1 million in a second. But when I see that clip and the fallout from it, this is what I see: is how are they able to take that moment and turn it into something that it actually wasn't? And that's not unique to that clip. That's the story of every day, where up seems down and vice versa, and they can reshape it, and that's narrative dominance. And what you have here is a constellation of the largest storytellers. And this is obviously, like I said, just the ones that are over 1 million. And the right dominates. They get to pick the battles, they get to define the story. And that is very much what we live in every day. That is what politics is just a particular civic action based on a story that you've been told and where you want to go. And the story you believe. And this is it. And now, obviously, a lot of it is, some of these people now are part of the administration, like Dan Bongino, who's a deputy FBI director. And some of these people didn't start in politics. Many of them, actually, they were comedians or elsewhere. And I'll just note one last thing, because I think it puts a fine point on the question, is that I see this picture. That's the first thing, because that's what we're confronting every day. Every minute of every day is a landscape where the storytellers, and I'm not even getting to the larger social media side, these are just the storytellers. These are the ones that are taking all the raw material from the various tweet threads and X posts and elsewhere, and they're turning it into something that is digestible. They're making it a thing, a story that can be shared and can be understood, the narrative. Um, this is what they do. This is why we focus on the shows, at least for the purposes of this study. And the reason we made the cutoff at 1 million is because if you try to visualize it, where at less than 1 million, you can't see any blue at all. The entire thing becomes a big red blotch. The imbalance is incredible. And just to put a number on it, if you take the total amount of the audiences for these programs, 82% of the audience is for right-leaning programs. The rest is for left-leaning programs. So they control the story. And the effect of that is not just that is that they can have a really distorted narrative that we live in, and that is a very large part of the day-to-day fights that we deal with. But it's that you can take a clip like that, and it is one small page, one chapter in a larger story that they're telling about the relationship of the Democratic Party to the people that they represent, to the way that they exercise power, and to current and future constituents. And that's it. It's a bastardization, and that is the real challenge that we're dealing with, is narrative dominance. And I think a lot of our politics, and this is the last piece, is that when you build an organized power, especially in politics, campaigns are really on the margins. They're about winning a point or two here in a few key areas, and that works when it's a micro election. But when we're in a landscape that's so lopsided right now, it's a macro problem. The story is totally distorted, and the landscape is polluted from the bottom to the top. And we'll get into some of the more hopeful parts of this, because there are parts there, but I'm also realistic. And I think if we have to grapple with the challenge that we have, and that is that every day, every moment, they get to drive, shape, control, distort the story that is being told, the predominant story. And I just don't know how you ultimately build an organized power in any sustainable or meaningful way, unless you really grapple with the reality and the challenges of this imbalance.
And this Angelo's point here, brilliant point about what narrative dominance is and what it means, is so fundamental to this conversation on mis and disinformation, right? And really quickly, Nicole, I apologize because you've heard me say this 700 million times. So here's just for one more. If we set out the definitions here of the types of lies, right? We've got misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, right? And misinformation is simply, incorrect information, and incorrect information. And when I at Fair Fight, I would often say this is just incorrect polling hours, right? Disinformation requires intent. It's lies with the intent to lie. And so if somebody is actively pushing incorrect polling hours to communities, they're spreading disinformation. And then that can be hacked materials, that can be putting people's personal information online, and it can be taking kernels of truth or videos or moment or content that is true, and twisting and manipulating it in a way to falsely and maliciously harm people. And what we are seeing right now is what happens when that is happening on a nationwide scale, and then and also being amplified online. Because one of the most important things for everybody to realize in this moment is that disinformation, it works on everybody, right? It works on all of us because our brains work in a very similar way. And that is that the more times you hear something, y'all, the more likely you are to believe it's true, and the more likely you are to believe other people believe it's true as well. Our brains will substitute repetition for truth. It is how we teach little kids things. It's how we still default to interacting with information. And so this becomes, in today's media ecosystem, a problem of amplification, right? If you have all of these social media apps and you are able to put the same content, the same lie in front of somebody 20 times a day, right? It's never been easier to convince people of things that are not true, that are not real. And so if there is, if we were 5 years ago dealing with individual narratives, disinformation narratives that we had to fight back against, right? And think of it as like, individual bees that we've got to swat. We are now dealing with a problem of propaganda, of all encompassing myths and disinformation, right? If there's a swarm of bees surrounding you, right? The only way to push through a fight of propaganda is through amplification, right? And so that chart, those graphs that Angelo is showing, what that is saying is that, let's say that we find the absolute perfect message that is, the most persuasive ever. It's not going to matter if nobody can hear it, right? And so this problem of amplification is fundamental right now to our democracy, fundamental to our information ecosystems, and fundamental to our ability to build and sustain power in our communities.
And I think one put a sort of bow on it because I think it's an interesting data point that helps underscore it. I love when Esosa makes a point about that misinformation works on everyone because it's so true. And even if you think it's not, it is true. And one, I sometimes play video games and I love cheat codes. What cheat code is basically lets you play with, without dying, have unlimited lives, whatever. I love cheat codes. Um, and there are cheat codes in organizing too, and campaigning in this work. Like one thing I do, I try not to ever pay for something that somebody else already paid for, especially if it's a big corporation. And advertisers spend a lot of time studying how to get people to believe things about their products, about their brand. Billions, maybe even, and Google did this really big thing, huge study that looked at something that they call the zero moment of truth, which is the moment that somebody acts on a purchase, the decision to make it based on a brand. And we won't get into the details there, but there's something that came out of that research called the 7-11-4 rule, which is that basically a brand can get a consumer to believe anything about their brand, their story, their product, if they can give them an aggregate, a total of 7 hours about of engagement. And it doesn't have to be them consuming content. They can just be thinking about it after they saw a really interesting ad or some conversation. So 7 hours of thinking in their brain. Uh, 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 11 touch points, meaning you heard it 11 times, which has always been a standard marketing thing for decades, from 4 different places. So maybe from one of the TV shows that you watch, maybe from one of your friends who is evangelizing the product. And that is not that dissimilar from the misinformation or information that Esosa was referring to. And so one of the effects of this narrative dominance is that you get all of that in one package, right? So I'm watching my video game streaming and I hear something about Trump's policies on DEI or war or peace. Okay. And then, and I'm watching my latest like broadcast. And, I'm mostly just there because I'm interested in some of the UFC stuff or whatever. But then they mention this other thing. They reinforce that misinformation. That's the second touch point, the second place. You see how something false can calcify in someone's brain over time. And that's it. That's the part of how it works, is that everyone is susceptible to the 7-11-4 rule. It's a pretty standard. Now, maybe some people are, a little denser. Maybe they need 7-11-5, but the effect is still there. It could be totally ridiculous, and you will eventually believe it. And they already have that baked in. Turnkey 7-11-4.
Oh, this kind of makes me think, and it's probably a little bit more of like a can of worms and we're going to have time to get into on this, right? But like I think we can all sort of think about the last few years and everything that y'all are saying so eloquently. It's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. I do that. I see how that happens. But for both of y'all, kind of where do you think some of this really started? Is it like a super obvious point where we can all say like, oh, it was when Trump started running? Is it something specific that you guys really point to? Because I think a lot of this kind of stuff, obviously we want to be educated about it. But for me, at least, I think a lot of the ways to be able to combat things like voter suppression or anything like that is to understand the root of it. And you guys both really touched really well on kind of the pieces of narrative dominance and how the right has overtaken and amplified their messaging. But I'm just curious, and I'm hoping other folks are too, kind of what you guys would pinpoint as where this kind of kicked off.
And that's such an important question, Nicole. And um, one of the things we always try to remind folks at Onyx Impact is that disinformation is as old as white supremacy, right? And it's been used for generations to deter, to dissuade, to divide Black communities from civic engagement, and it's been used against all communities. And so, we have in many ways always had to find ways to combat this, to fight this, to make sure that not just Black folks, but everyone is receiving better information, better content. And we've also seen, how powerful and how hard pushing back against these types of claims are. I think that, in terms of the current moment, um, so much is so astounding to us in this path down, a liberalism, and also we're not the first, fifth, or 15th country to go down it, right? We've seen how um, disinformation is actually a poison to a democratic system that allows people freedom of speech, right? On the largest scale possible, on the largest amplification scale possible. We've seen how that is one of the uh, you know biggest largest points of weakness, right, in a free uh, speech democratic system, is that it will allow for lies to spread. And so if we're in a media environment, a brand new media environment that allows that spread to happen so quickly, so fast, right, you can really, at this moment, you can take advantage of of a democratic system in ways that you can't take advantage of other types of political systems.
And I think that, it depends on when this started, right? Because you could say that it started in the 90s when the right when the right invested in not just propping up their own media properties, but they had talk radio and Fox News. I mean, Fox News was born. We think about Fox News transforming the country, and it did, but it was Fox News and talk radio together that had such a disproportionate effect. And they didn't have total narrative dominance at the time, but they had real influence and real power. And they would work the refs in newsrooms that at that point really were the agenda setters, the front page headlines, that kind of stuff. They, broadcast news still really set the narrative and had a disproportionate influence, at least on the news and the story. That's not to diminish the destructive power of Fox and talk radio. They had huge destructive power. Um, but I think the current moment, when I think about when it started and how we got to this place, yeah, obviously the tech companies and the social, that, yeah, sure, the algorithms, all that part of it. But there was a moment, two particular things in right after President Obama won re-election. One was that a bunch of right-wing funders got together and they spent about $30 million, which is not very much money in political spending, on Facebook farms. So if I ran a group, conservatives for California, and I had 5,000 members in my Facebook group, all of a sudden I'd get $50,000 to run Facebook ads to find more conservatives in California. They basically incubated a whole bunch of communities online that were there already. There wasn't AstroTurf. They just helped juice them. They said, we need more engagement, more kinetic energy. We're so behind online. We need more of that. That investment had a very long tail, right? Because once you get enough energy together, you get a gravitational force, and those things start to grow more and more on their own. But they really primed the pump with that $30 million. And then the second, I think, moment, the flip side of that was Gamergate. And that's where you sort of had the right wing sort of got together and was very focused on a few women reporters in gaming, but it was much bigger than that. And we don't really get into the mechanics of Gamergate or the substance. The part about it that's key, though, is that it was a major cross-pollinating moment. That's when Stephen Bannon got together and started having people for Breitbart write about this topic, right? And it really was a precursor to, in part, what Trump did, because online, we were so siloed. The filter bubble, and you're with your own people and your own demographic, your own ideas, everything was sort of locked in. But when something really grows fast, when it goes viral, it's when it's spreading from one community to the other. when it's cross-pollinating. And that's when the recommendation engines for social media really kick in. That's when stuff really gets off the charts. And Gamergate was a really big moment of cross pollination across different communities. You had the burgeoning men's rights movement at the time, the alt right movement, the Proud Boys, right? You had traditional sort of like issue based organizers. You had the conspiracists get together, the misogynists. They all were like, yeah, I can put my hand in this, you know. And it really helped grow and show the power of those cross pollinating moments. And it's a strategy and a tactic that Trump repeatedly did during his 2016 campaign, was to take otherwise disconnected audiences and help connect them. And that process over and over and over again is a very large part of the mechanics of how they built and organized power on the fringes.
That's, I think I appreciate you guys both for kind of like, I know it's probably a lot you could get into about how we got to where we are and like what the individual specific points that got us here, but it's helpful, I think, for people to know and kind of conceptualize like there were a lot of players in this, there was a lot of planning, there was a lot of funding, like a lot of investment, and a lot of people who, I don't know if I'd want to call them smart, but I guess, right? Like they've been achieving their goal. They just use their smarts and their money for evil. So to the point, like we've been here before, it just looks a little bit different, I think, from what y'all were saying with social media and the culture of influencers and streamers that we have right now. And so my question, and I want to kind of get into the work that y'all are doing, and also how people can be better and not fall prey to mis and disinformation. So this is kind of like a dream world question, but if y'all had all the money in the world, what would be your game plan, and what do y'all think is missing from the current landscape to combat this narrative dominance, to combat the amplification and the prevalence of mis and disinformation?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if I had all the money in the world, I would have like 75 different um, tactics that I'd love to help deploy and make healthier information ecosystems. But, two that I can think of right now is, I think there would be a need to create and grow, our own online communities that are based in different philosophies of a democratic ecosystem that aren't that beholden to very large individuals that end up having a massively disproportionate impact on what we all believe to be true, right? That is at its core is problematic. And so we're having to, because that's how the current system is set up, we're having to um, um, work within that to push back on it. So how do we create, our own social media ecosystems? And then two, uh, we know a lot about how people uh, are consuming information. We know how young Black folks are 5 times more likely, young people in particular, right, are so much more likely to get their news online, passively, and on these apps than on any individual news site or what have you. But we also know that if you are simply exposed to like some type of consistent news, you are far, 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 far less likely to go down a lot of these rabbit holes, right? And so one of the things that Onyx Impact is so passionate about is getting folks to follow, local Black news on social media, to follow their local Black newspapers, to subscribe to them, for everyone to follow and subscribe to their local newspapers that are one, held to a higher standard of truth and accountability, because generally right now there's entirely too much of a false correlation between credibility and following online that we really need to detangle. But true news organizations still have, they're not perfect by any means, but they have that higher standard of accountability, especially Black news, local news. They're both accountable to the overall philosophies of journalism and as well to the Black community. And so one of the things that we are trying to make sure that folks do is to subscribe to their local newspaper, both online, make sure their feeds are healthier, and do it subscribe to their email as well. So I probably pay for subscriptions to Black News for every single person in the country.
I think I would do what Esosa was saying at the beginning, which is that, when we talk about creators, I don't want to just prop up a bunch of partisan stooges. I'm not interested. I don't think that's going to help, is just have a, or anything like that. I don't think that's the goal. Right now, politics is downstream from culture anyway. The right is no longer fighting politics. They think of politics as that's going to come. They are now transforming and shaping culture, and they see a lot of the work that they're doing with government as a mechanism and a vehicle for doing that. That's why he's going after all these institutions. It's not an accident. It's part of this larger plan to use the government as a cudgel to shape and transform our culture and our society. Um, one is I would be flooding the room not just with money but with wraparound services. They do have narrative dominance, and that the one of the effects though is that it gives them a little bit of a it creates a distorted picture of just how popular and powerful they are. They're trying to transform culture because they're not the dominant culture. They're not cool. They're not the zeitgeist. They can become it. That's what they're trying to do by suppressing the participation of so many people that help shape that, the good people, the drivers of our culture and influence. And they've done a lot of damage and work to do that, to suppress the shaping of culture. But so for me, it would be a series of not just resources for people that are doing this work already, but just so they could do more of it. But then the other wraparound services that are provided, I think back to this thing that happened during the first Trump administration. A couple of right-wing billionaires put together a fund, and then a week-long event where thousands of right-wing people online, went to Florida for a retreat where they learned how to optimize memes. It wasn't even their job. It's not like it was a conference for right-wing think tanks. It was a bunch of creators online, shit posters is what I think they're referred to, is what I would call them. And they learned how to optimize memes. Now, in the moment, maybe they didn't change much, but you see the effects now, right? Many of those people, yeah, they maybe moved on, they found other hobbies, but a lot of them got really good at it. And that helps reinforce this thing because they see the effects of this. So that's the kind of stuff when we talk about incubating creatives, it's actually just investing in not just the people that are doing the politics, but the people that are doing the hiking trails and making sure that they're connecting the harms to their experiences. The storm chasers now, the people that do unboxing videos, I would love to have them ripping on how much the economy is messing up their entire market. Like that's culture. That's the kind of stuff the right invests in. And that's the kind of thing that I think we should be helping reinforce and buttress. We have to think strategically. The second is I'd be focusing on kids and young people, not to be weird about it, but like they're already doing that. I mean, the state education is replacing their curriculums with things from Prager University, like really weird pro-Trump propaganda and culture. They are, it's disturbing how much the young people moved to the right last cycle because this is their worldview. This is the world that they live in. Is this one that's disproportionately shaped by the right now, this online landscape? But it's also because they've made a lot of investments in young people and they're starting to pay off. And I would do that at every level. And then the third would be, and it always sounds kind of lame but it's real, is that there is a real need right now for some type of media literacy. We don't have civics education anymore. Our information diets have changed so much, and with AI, that's only going to dramatically increase. And there does need to be a much more concerted, systematic, wide effort for how people really understand that. I think the largest media literacy educator right now in the country is actually the Girl Scouts. And that's not insignificant, but that's not great if that's the largest.
And yeah, I can't uplift and amplify Angelo's point that they are not cool. They are just loud. And we need to remember that point as being fundamental to how we fight back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I really appreciate pivoting to the highlighting the way that they've kind of like transitioned all of this into culture. That's a really big part of it. And I think it's something people are talking about a little bit more today, but right, it's to the point y'all made of they're not cool, their ideas are bad, but they tap into enough people who are, like you said, doing unboxing videos. I watch those all the time. I see the videos of the people who are doing like the women influencers who are doing like the family videos about like making homemade sourdough bread every day. And something about it, it gets you, right? You keep watching, even though I'm not going to make sourdough bread. But it goes to a point of how like anybody and everybody, all of us can fall victim to this, no matter how, smart we think we are and tuned to all of this, we think that we are. And part of that is that's why they do it the way that they do it, because it works. And so to that point, something that I want to highlight, and Esosa, if you could touch on this a little bit more to the point of kind of what are things people can be doing that y'all both highlighted really well, and what are things that need to be done to kind of combat some of this and the narrative dominance and them kind of integrating their ideals into culture. But Onyx Impact launched a digital green book, which is really, really cool. And so if you could just talk a little bit about the history, kind of like where it comes from, and then how the digital green book is a tool to kind of combat some of the things that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of our favorite projects over here at Onyx Impact. And as some of you know, the original Green Book from 1936 to 1966 was an effort by Victor Green to create these green travel pamphlets for Black families to have safe locations, to know what the safe locations were to travel. Right. Our digital Green Book is trying to help Black folks find safe spaces online to create healthier, more resilient Black communities, and to grow digital fluency writ large. And so if you go to digitalgreenbook.org, you'll see, it's broken down into 3 sections, really. How do we protect our truth? How do we protect our kids? And how do we protect our culture? Right. And from our truth, it's how do we expose these tactics that they're going to use over and over and over again? How do we make sure people know, hey, 42% of online social traffic in the comment sections and headlines are actually malicious bots, right? They are distorting our reality significantly by making us believe conversations are far more widespread than they are, right? How do we make sure that people know it doesn't matter what your political leaning is? Uh, if you see a piece of content that elicits a strong negative emotional response, pause and double check and make sure that it's real. Right. It gives you these tips and tricks. It expose, like, do not, like, they're going to try to rebrand hate as free speech. Don't let them. Right. They're going to try to cause chaos to make it so that we can't move, that they can divide us, that they can take even more power. Don't let them. Right. But it also works to help what are tools and resources for our kids to be able to learn more digital fluency, right? To be able to, we know that this content moderation, a really weird term, is really, what they're really saying is they're allowing more racist content, more anti-Black content, more anti-Semitic content into the feeds of our kids, well before we've even had a chance to talk to our kids about what these types of topics mean for them, right? But my favorite part of the digital green book, y'all, is a tool that we created to help Black folks find better information, help all folks find better information, right? It's an AI tool that my wonderful, brilliant Black research team called Aisha, right? And it's on the digital green book. It's on the first page when you get there. And what we did was we took a skeleton of a tool, and we fed it Black national news, right? We fed it Black local news. We spent weeks on the system prompt on what does Black history look like, Black trauma, Black joy, Black excellence, right? We wanted and we gave it the initial prompt of, like, you're here to serve Black people first and foremost, right? And then we released it, and we have been just shocked at the response, right? And how wonderful Aisha is in helping people find better information. You go there, you type in your state, nothing else. Aisha's going to send you a list of the local Black news sources, right, in your state. Nicole, you type in God is good, Aisha's going to respond all the time. Right? Right, she's here, she's made for us and by us, and here to help Black folks find everything from the best sources. She's focused on Black news sources, to the best oxtail recipes, to just having the best conversations. So highly recommend that folks check her out. And it's just one of the many things. If people are unclear, unsure If a narrative is true, they can ask Aisha, right? If people want to find a better source of information, they can ask Aisha. And so we hope that she can further Onyx Impact's mission to create healthier online communities for folks. And we hope that people check out the entire Green Book and all of the original Green Book, as well as the digital Green Book and all the resources that are there for folks.
I think that I appreciate that, Esosa, and it goes to the point of what y'all both said of how we need to have a bigger impact in culture to kind of help combat some of this, how we need to meet people where they are. We need to be like culturally relevant, right? It's the point of not everybody wants to like get their news from somebody who clearly looks like a politician, like in their office wearing a suit. People want to see people who look like them. People want to see people who they don't feel like are trying to peddle something
People
to
want to
them.
see Angelo. People want to see more of Angelo. He could start his own podcast here.
Yeah, and to that point, Angela, if you don't have a podcast coming up that you're going to start and launch soon, but what are some of the things that y'all are working on at Media Matters for America to kind of like, to this point, like address the cultural issue, address the narrative dominance, and help equip people with tools and resources?
So I think I'll start by, because it's going to time with what I think we're doing now that's directly applicable. One is, I think the one thing to consider for everyone is that um, you shouldn't lose sight of your own power and that your participation matters. And that's not hokey, it's the truth. But one thing to consider about the right in particular, especially on social media, it becomes magnified, is that they've had a few generations where they've built up an amplification imperative. Rush Limbaugh used to have 20 plus million listeners, and his audience used to call themselves ditto heads. They would take the thing that they heard him say on the radio and they would echo it back out in their day-to-day life. They would talk about it. They would just repeat it. That's literally what they meant, ditto heads. There's two generations of right-wing consumers that don't just hear the thing. They don't just passively listen to it. They feel the need to amplify it, to evangelize the idea, to then tell their friends, their peers. And I'll take it out of a political context, but it does have political effects. One trend that's been growing really quickly is this idea that testosterone is down amongst young men, right? And they hear this all over the place. And even if I'm a young guy consuming this stuff, even if my friends are not listening to these things, I'm talking about it. I'm saying, hey, our testosterone's low because of feminism, because of all these things. And the way we have to improve it is to smoke cigarettes and tan our testicles, which is a real thing that they tell them to do. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's growing. There's an entire subset in the fitness community now called hybrid training, where you smoke cigarettes while you work out in order to boost your testosterone. When RFK gets up there and talks about testosterone rates in young men, he knows what he's doing. He's giving a wink and a nod to this very important percolating part of the audience. So, and that has grown very fast. And it's built on this idea that they hear something, they amplify it, they evangelize it. And so what I would say is that in an environment where so much of what we see, hear, feel is shaped by the algorithms, you shouldn't lose sight of the importance of your participation. And especially when things are ugly and terrible, the natural response is to duck and cover. Um, the consequences of that are magnified when you're doing it online, because you're basically then telling the algorithm or AI or Google that the nonsense that's getting more kinetic energy, more engagement is the right answer. And that's not true. So one, you shouldn't lose sight of your own power. And the effect of that is that it's real. You should think about the moments where it matters. Right after the election, one of the things that some right wingers started to do was say, "Your body, my choice." It's messed up. It's awful, right? And if you look at when it stopped, it didn't stop because they decided to have a heart or in the goodness of like they changed their minds. No, it stopped because a bunch of people who were Jake Paul's fans, who's sort of this UFC fighter and bro guy, when he endorsed Trump, got some blowback from his fans, and he said, "I promise that if something bad ever happens, I will be the first one out there." And instead of ignoring it, a lot of people that followed him said, "Hey, they're saying your body, my choice, and you promised to do something about it." And he did. He went and started calling out personally all these right-wing influencers that were doing it. Now, is he a good guy? No. But did he put speed bumps in the schools on there? Did he stop one bet? Yes. And that's the effect. That happened because people chose to respond, to engage. And that's a small illustration. There's a lot of others, but it is important to not lose sight of the effect of you continuing to participate in some way. And that ties into what I'm going to say about what Media Matters are doing. That big picture of all that red, it's bleak. It is, but the flip side of that is that it wasn't that red a couple of years ago. A lot of those big red bubbles were either not doing politics at all, or they were kind of left leaning, or whatever. So, or a lot of gamers that got engaged. They got engaged because of issues of war and peace. They thought Trump was the peace candidate, and we don't have to get into why. I think we know. There were some pretty not great visuals during the campaign that helped reinforce that false narrative that Vice President Harris was somehow a war candidate, which is nonsense, right? But that there were visuals that reinforced that narrative was percolating, and a bunch of gamers got involved and said, we don't want to go to war. We want to sit here and play war games, right? We want to go to war, so that we want you not to vote for Trump because he says he's for peace and Democrats are for war. Um, when you look at that landscape, it's not like Fox or the traditional media, very monolithic. It is a weird patchwork with a lot of small fractures, and the tiniest little discrepancies can turn into full blown cracks. And I think the one thing that we're doing is being really sensitive to where those cracks and fault lines are, uh, so that we can apply pressure to them to say, hey, there's a fault line. Make sure you tweak it. And that's where your voice matters. Because if you don't have that muscle memory of engaging, when those moments come up, being able to exploit them, to use them well, to turn those small cracks into fractures, we won't be able to optimize it. And so not only do you get the small victories along the way, but it also gives you the muscle memory of community, of how you engage, what's the right way to engage, a little bit of antibodies against some of the blowback you might get and the nasty comments, but it will matter because, and I think that's the one thing we're doing now that's really, that ties in with that. And then the second big thing is that we're a reckoning. The platforms. There's a reason Trump had them on the stage when he was on during the inauguration. Why he was so fixated on sort of the tech leaders. It wasn't just because they had the most money. It's because they control so much of the levers of what we see and hear. There's so much power, and they rolled back a whole bunch of stuff, not just the fact checking stuff. They really gave the keys to a bunch of basically the right wing lies. And then they turned off all their research tools, and a bunch of places stopped doing the research. And it's kind of like a hurricane. There is a hurricane coming. We can't stop it. That's the reality. A whole bunch of bad stuff's going to happen. It's true, and we're seeing it. It's getting worse. But there's got to be a reckoning. And one thing that we're seeing now, we just did this study recently that showed that if you watch one clip from one of these comedy podcasts, what happens to your algorithm after you do that? You start getting served up a buffet of nonsense. Misogyny, anti-government conspiracies. One clip is enough to get to pollute your next 425 recommendations from TikTok. Now, yeah, maybe a bunch of young guys who see that, they're not going to get sucked in, but you serve them a buffet of ridiculous ideas, eventually they're going to pick one plate and they're going to stick with it and go deeper down that rabbit hole. They're going to self-sort into extremism. That's research that we're doing now. Some of it can be adjusted on the margins, but there will be a reckoning at some point. And being able to put a spotlight there institutionally is what we're doing. But the thing that we're doing in community is being able to help identify those fault lines and obviously tell a story about the fever swamp creatures that are in charge and running amok.
Thank you. And I certainly appreciate the exposing the bad guys. I think that definitely helps to put a face to it all and to a face to what they're doing so people can better recognize it. And something that strikes me from the start of this conversation and even into now, and some of the other things you both have been saying is a lot of this with like the right wing permeating our media and to an extent our culture is they kind of started out small, right? There was a time where we can all think back on some of these right wing things and most people rejected them and were like, these are really fringe, these are really wild, these are crazy. So if I'm trying to find the bright side of that, it's that on our end, right, like y'all's organizations are both doing incredible things that are in no way small. They're having an impact and will continue to, but there are things that we can all do that are small things to have an impact and to help counter some of this, especially as we head into, like you mentioned, Angela, things are certainly getting worse and hopefully there is a reckoning coming soon, but we're heading into another election cycle. We have to be prepared for that. And so we don't have a ton of time left, but I just would like for each of you, if you could say kind of like if you have like, 1 minute to tell people like the thing that they need to be doing, and that if like each person told that to every single person they ever see, that it could really help. And then too, if y'all could both just kind of tell us one thing that you do to like keep from being overwhelmed, because being in these like right-wing media cesspools has got to be a lot.
Uh, yes, absolutely, 100%. And you know, I stay sane by following petty NBA gossip, right? All basketball, all basketball gossip all the time, NBA, WNBA, what have you. Like that is uh, you know, that and my wonderful 5-year-old niece who's downstairs. Those two things keep me sane. In terms of how folks, what I think folks here can take away a from a hopeful perspective is like fear and outrage. They are easy ways to drive engagement, right? But at the end of the day, hope is still going to drive way, way, way more. If we can find those messages, find those wins, find those ways to break through and amplify. We've seen time and time again that people are still in these times searching for things that are going to bring them hope, going to bring them power, going to show them a vision of what is better and what is possible. And so it is possible. It is possible and necessary to change the conversation, to provide people with a vision for what a better uh, uh, beloved community can look like, right? And I think that there only one side is really going to be able to do that moving forward. And so it's our opportunity to lose, right? That's why conversations like this are so important. That's why everybody on this call is so important. We have seen the power of organizing. We have seen the power of messages of hope, especially in Georgia, especially in the South. There's nothing that brings me more hope and joy than seeing uh, groups of Black women organize in the South. And so if they can still be doing it, then we can all still be doing it, and we can get through this together. And I would remind everybody of the power of their own voice, their own platforms, and their own amplification in this current moment.
I would say, building on that, in terms of what people can do, is, well, obviously don't forget that. And the other piece is that give them a chance to come back. A lot of these people are bad, and some people are just bad, and they're never going to be good, and that's unfortunate. And some people are just, they believe weird stuff. We've always had that in this country too. It's like, it's part of our spice. But they've never been connected. Usually they were very disconnected, and so they didn't have a lot of influence. But we always had sort of, really weird, fringy, destructive things. I mean, there's literally a party called the Barn Burners. They used to set their barns on fire to prove a point. Their own barns. It was like weird. It was dumb. It was truly insane. Um, and So one is though, but there's a lot of people that are not that way. And I'm not like, oh, we should be sympathetic to Trump voters. That's not what I'm suggesting. But some of these people, especially the ones that have influence, they made a big move for a variety of reasons, or they got duped. They got duped by misinformation or a false narrative. And some of them need to come back, and they need to have a way. And I don't and that starts small. Be a not to lose sight of that. That if somebody is ready to come back, give them a chance. And there are plenty of people that are being, and maybe they won't come back until they're directly harmed by it. And the reality is that's most people. Most people don't care until it affects them, and that sucks. But in terms of how that is a place for the future, there's going to be moments now. The harms are beginning to materialize, and there's going to be a lot of disillusionment. There's a lot of people that thought Trump was going to be the peace guy and the nationalist, and somehow now he's like the ultimate globalist, flying bombers all over the place. Like there's a moment, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. That's just cold hard realpolitik. And so be that example, so that if somebody can come back, yeah, maybe give them a nudge, but let them come back if they want, and to create that space for it, and to help others create that space. That's what being a model is in leaders. And if you're an activist, if you're an organizer, you have influence amongst your peers, and modeling that behavior means that there are others that will then to do that. And then the last thing for myself, how I sort of manage, everything is terrible, and we live in the fever swamps, and the Trump administration is investigating us, and Musk is suing us in all kinds of places, and it's just an absolute nightmare. So I feel it every day, and I'm really sympathetic to and empathetic to all the people experiencing it. The way I manage though is at least like once a month, no, twice, maybe more. I find one of my favorite DJs in the area, or I might travel for it, and because I'm like a little groupie, and I will just go dance for overnight. And that's it. That's the plan. And I commit to doing that. And I'm sure I'm like ridiculous and it looks ridiculous, and I do not care. It feels great. It's a blast. It's good for the brain. It's good for the body. That's what I do. And it works. And that's sort of and I don't care if people come with me, if my friends, I don't give a damn. I go and I do it, and I commit to that space and having that intentionality. And like the same way that I am intentional about making sure that some people that are ready to come back, I let them come back, even if I rip them. I'm intentional about like giving myself that reset space. And I live on spite and caffeine, so like I should be thriving now, but even I need that break. So that's what I do.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. And I think that's a really great note to end on, right? One day our friends and neighbors will come to their senses. So let's stay hopeful and optimistic, give them a nudge. We all have power, and we can find power in our community, the people we love and care about. We can all find power and joy in dancing. And so I just want to really thank y'all both, Angelo and Esosa, for joining us this evening. The work y'all do is incredible, and this has been a really fun conversation. So I'm really grateful I got to be a part of it with y'all. And to thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please, please stay up to speed on Media Matters for America and Onyx Impact. They have incredible resources, always really good news and information, and ways that you can be part of this fight and ways to stay hopeful. And please be on the lookout for more opportunities to learn, engage, and to fight back with us. And thank y'all all so much. And everybody have a wonderful night.